The one line that comes in from the left of that picture and the other from the top right are the two roads that come into Oak Park Station. They can only be accessed by four-wheel drive. If you're driving on those roads, you're going to one of the stations or you're lost.
Imagine the psychological mirror in this case. Jess, a single mother with Ronnie to look after. She has to find somewhere to go in order to take care of her little boy. But then another little boy comes along.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
There are several gates on each of the driveways which impede access to Oak Park Station, and a number of these gates are regularly locked and secured by the station owners and the property owners in the area.
In a very real sense, the trauma that Jess must be feeling right now after the fact is mirrored by the trauma, stress, emergency and burden the family were going through before the fact. Let me explain. If you think about it, Josh and Jess were still together when they had Gus and before they had Ronnie. But when Ronnie was born, at least two things happened. Firstly, there was now even more pressure on Josh to bring home the bacon, something he possibly failed to do. And secondly, there was an even greater need to have an extra person besides Jess to look after and supervise the kids, and in this case, the other kid, while Jess was taking care of Ronnie, feeding him, nursing him, changing him, clothing him, washing him, attending to him. Of course, all of this would have affected Gus as well, who would have been used to getting the lion's share of mum and dad's attention. Now much of that would be diverted. At what point did the Lamonts move to the sheep station is what I'd like to know. And was that move partially to rely on Jess's parents to shoulder some of the burden of looking after Gus while Josh was at work, both the time burden and the resource burden, because children are expensive. You've got to feed them, you've got to clothe them, eventually you've got to take them to school as well. You've got to buy toys for them. Now let's dive into these questions in more detail, shall we? But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, I checked my stats and I see 80% of you aren't subscribed. If you're one of them, please make sure you do subscribe. I've also downloaded this video into the 4K format, so if you're watching this on television, do let me know if your quality, your viewing quality is noticeably better or not. If you're finding this ongoing analysis worthwhile, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. And we're going to deal with this issue of the dynamic that Ronnie brought to the family through three dimensions: resources, stress, and neglect. Let's start with resources.
We know that if there is a vehicle that is sighted anywhere in the vicinity of Oak Park Station, I'm saying anywhere kilometres away from Oak Park Station, there is normally dust in the air that will tell you that a vehicle is either arriving or leaving that area.
By the way, if you feel like it's unfair drawing these inferences, you can do the same thing with the Madeleine McCann case, where you had two little children and then the older child who also disappeared. You can do the same with the Ramsey case, where you had two children, one of them using up a lot of resources. The same too in the Laurie Vallow case, where one child had autism and required additional care, JJ Vallow in that case. Now, remember, Gus was about 3 to 4 years older than Ronnie. This age gap can create some logistical issues, especially when one child approaches school-going age, even kindergarten, while the other does not. One child has to be taken to school, picked up from school, and all the preparations that go along with that, schedules, etc., while the other child has its own requirements and demands. Once again, at this very early stage, the demands on both parents is really at a peak, and one parent is really going to have their hands full dealing with two little boys. This again may have required the additional resources, additional time availability, and perhaps even finances that Gus's grandparents could theoretically provide. It is often the grandparents that sort of cover the difficulties in terms of child rearing. If you're a grandparent, you can probably relate. Now, the trouble is both of Gus's grandparents had some of their own preoccupations too. Besides the sheep, remember there was also the ongoing construction work taking place around the homestead. And so think about it just in that basic sense. Is that really the best playground for a 4-year-old? Clearly not. And that brings us to the second area, the second dimension, stress.
There's been no foreign tracks located arriving or leaving the property.
Now, if we simply include the different ages of these two little boys into our calculus, remember one is 1 year old and the other is about 4 years old, we can see how this would put serious demands on the parents. And if one parent is persona non grata, as Josh apparently became with Josie, or perhaps suffered the disapproval of both Jess's parents, well, then the level of stress simply skyrockets on everyone. So once Josh was given the boot, once he became kind of a pariah, his role necessarily needed to fall to someone else. And that someone arguably ended up being Shannon. Now, in the scenario we've been given by them, Josie and Jess were both away from the homestead. Josh clearly was no longer even in the area as well. And so it was left to Shannon to look after Ronnie and Gus, while she was also apparently cooking a meal. Now, again, the area outside the front door is basically a construction site. Just recently, by the way, I walked my dog through school grounds just after sunset, and there is an extensive area where they are laying foundations. It's cordoned off, but it's particularly hazardous terrain in low light. There are holes, irregular holes. There are pieces of metal lying around for foundations. There's mounds of sand, lengths of pipe, bales of plastic. It's a significant obstacle course for an adult, let alone a 4-year-old, and in my case, a small little dog. And why do you think there's bunting to cordon off the area in a school setting? And if there wasn't any bunting, and say a child fell in one of these holes, excavation areas, and let's say broke a bone and had to be taken to hospital, who would be liable? And that brings us to the second dimension, neglect.
The timing of being in the area when Gus was playing outside would need to be impeccable. If Gus has been abducted, it is absolutely fortuitous. There is no pattern of Gus playing outside at Oak Park Station.
So the legal issue, the pertinent legal issue in this case may well derive out of an escalating family dynamic. I provided the broad strokes, but in any family situation, if the strain is sufficient, if the stress is significant, it can lead to neglect. And to the extent that Gus seemed capable of amusing himself and looking after himself, I guess the temptation could have been there to leave the little boy unattended for increasing stretches of time. This may have started off as a benign form of neglect, well, until something goes wrong. The point to emphasize here is that Ronnie's appearance on the scene heavily influenced the situation and diverted a lot of resources, time and energy, yes, but also created additional issues, stress, financial burden. And if Josh possibly struggled to meet these, and then in his absence, whoever was supposed to replace him, well, didn't they struggle as well? And so clearly many families deal with these same issues and overcome them. And so the question is, why couldn't this one? Who was calling the shots and pulling the parents away from caring for their own children? Not just Gus, but Ronnie as well.
That wasn't such a long walk after all.
Food for thought. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.